Hello, everyone. We're so happy that you're here tonight. Joy and I have been anticipating this with delight. So I'm Carol Stock Kranowitz, and this is Joy.
Hold on, I can't find my screen. There we go.
There, that looks great.
Good.
Good. We've been best buddies for a long, long time, and we are the co-authors of the InSync materials that Allison just mentioned. We wrote about our InSync philosophy and put in 50 InSync activities into Growing an InSync Child, and that came out in
10.
Okay, and then we follow that up with more InSync activities. You can either get them as cards, the InSync activity cards, or they also are available in a book, same idea. And our latest baby, born during the COVID season, is a year of mini moves for the InSync child. And these are weekly schedules with simple activities that young children can do, and they're quite entertaining. So we're grateful to Therapro for offering these publications on their website, and hope that you will have some interest in them. Now tonight, we're delighted that so many of you are here, and we know that many of you are occupational therapists and other kinds of therapists, and so we know that you know a lot about child development. Our approach this evening is to show you how we explain to parents who don't have the training that you have, how child development is designed by Mother Nature to go. We're going to keep it basic, and maybe this will help you in some circumstances where you're trying to explain child development to your kids' parents and teachers. So, Joy, tell our listeners how development actually seems to be going with many kids today.
Okay. Before I do that, I want to tell everybody out there that I am thrilled to use technology to share this with you, but I am quite a Luddite, and I'm trying to work from 2 computers. So if I press the wrong button, you'll see the wrong thing. Please bear with me. Okay. So here, oh dear. No, it's not going. There we go. Okay, so take a look at this cartoon. And I don't know the person who originated it, so I don't know if it was written tongue-in-cheek. But Carol and I think it's pretty sad, because though the world has changed dramatically in our lifetimes, and probably in some of your lifetimes, the way children develop hasn't changed at all. And long ago, we all used to move all the time. We even had to get up from our chairs and walk to the television and actually turn the knob to change the station. We don't do any of that stuff anymore. More importantly, the little kids don't do a lot of that stuff. They're very sedentary. And as a result of that, they are missing, oh dear me, they are missing out on a lot of development. So Carol, talk about that.
Okay. You know, these past 3 years have really been challenging for all children. COVID-19 has made it hard to explore the environment, to play, to learn how to make a dialogue and have a conversation, to develop self-help skills. It's really been tough. So while we don't want to make life harder for our kids, by making life easier for them, by doing for them to help them get dressed and get fed and move along, we do for them, and that is actually making it harder for them in the future, because now is the time to build their skills so that they can go where they want to go with growing independence, with all their systems purring smoothly. So we're seeing that this is harder for our kids than ever.
Yeah, yes. I think it's harder. I think in some ways it's easier to be a child now than it used to be, but you don't have to do so much to be a child now as much as kids 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago needed to do. And I think everyone listening will agree that there's many more ADHD diagnoses, more autism diagnoses, lots of OTs, at least around our geographic area, are just slammed with new patients. And that's not a coincidence. I think Carolyn will agree with me that the advent of technology and the advent especially of screens has made the world much smaller for children. And this is the time, this birth through early elementary is the time that everything else is built on. This is the time children need to be moving to develop what they need to have a good base for the rest of their lives. So the best way to talk about what we mean about we want children to be able to do things automatically is if you think about a car and you get in your car and you put on your seatbelt and you fix the mirror and you back up or go forward and you know how to turn on the directional signals and you know how to turn on the lights and you know where the gas is and where the brake is, and it's all really automatic. And especially if it's the car you're used to driving, and you can listen to the radio while you're driving and you can have a conversation while you're driving, and everything's automatic. But if you think about being in a car where the pedals are maybe reversed so that the brake is on the right side and the gas is on the left, or the directional signals are reversed. So when you push your hand up to turn right, it actually goes left. And little things like that, it becomes much less automatic. And you can still drive, but it takes a lot more work. And you don't want to have that conversation, and you don't want to listen to the radio, and you don't want to do anything except concentrate on what you're doing. So when parents say to you, well, my child can do this, it's not a question of whether or not your child can do it. It's with how much energy is the child spending to do whatever it is he's doing. So Carol, you want to talk about the building blocks?
Yeah. So we've thought about this a lot, and we think there are three fundamental building blocks that every child needs in order to become an instinct child. And one of these is integrated senses. And the sensory integration begins in utero as the child is taking in all kinds of sensations, and from the get-go, there's sensory processing going on. The second important building block is established perceptual motor skills. We want preschoolers, certainly kindergartners, to have all their perceptual motor skills moving smoothly, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. And the third important building block is well-functioning visual system. The visual system is being jeopardized these days because of children's concentration looking at a two-dimensional screen 2 feet from their faces. And we will share our concerns about that with you too. So these are these three important building blocks. And for the instinct child, these are essential. And let me tell you now what we think an instinct child can do. So the next slide says that these are skills. Joy's going to press the button. There it is. Okay. Okay. Okay, this is how we describe an in-sync child. This child is comfortable in his or her body. He's okay in his skin. He moves easily. He or she works and plays well in groups, has good self-help skills. The child is interested in the environment and pays attention to what's going on, and is willing to try new things. So we know kids need to be able to do all these things. And Joy, talk now about how this kind of development evolves.
Well, this is what's really important. Motor development is sequential, and everybody, except if there's an anatomical or a pathological or some kind of other thing going on, all of us develop in the same sequence. We don't develop at the same rate, and we don't develop at the same time. And if you have a room full of 10 one-year-olds, you're going to have a pretty large range of abilities. Some children will be just beginning walkers. Some will still be creeping on their hands and knees. Some will have been walking for 2 or 3 months. If you have a room of 10-year-olds, you're going to have a much smaller range of abilities. And of course, you'll have lots of other stuff going on too. But the important thing is that motor development is sequential. So when people would come into my clinic and wonder if their child was okay or not, as long as the sequence is right, then it's probably going to be okay. It's when you start to do things without the basis. And a better way to show that would be this. Oh, sorry, I'm not exactly sure why this isn't working. So think of the in-sync child at the top of a pyramid, and look at that bottom, the bottom of the pyramid. That's where the really primary sensory, the stuff that develops in utero and during the birth process, and the very primary sensory stuff happening. Built upon that is the perceptual motor skills, balance, certainly motor planning, other perceptual motor skills, and built upon that is a good visual system. And really all of these are developing at the same time, but some of them or need the basis of underlying stuff. The very top of the kid is the in-sync child, and that's the child that I like to think of as ready for kindergarten. But let's say that you jumped ahead in the sequence and you taught your child to write when he was 3, and he didn't have the laterality and the balance and the fine motor and the motor planning to do it. The whole thing is going to collapse, right? And what does that collapse look like? It could be a behavioral problem. It could be a kid who has tons of allergies. It could be a child with a learning disability, a quote, learning disability. It could be a lot of things. It's definitely not an in-sync child. So we want to, when we're working with parents, when we're working with kids, we want to make sure we're in the right sequence. And remember, sequential is a really primary word for us in the in-sync child philosophy. Everything's built upon something else. And we don't believe in saying, oh, this is where you are, you need to be up here. We believe in saying, oh, this is where you are, let's stay here until it's really solid, and then the child will move on, probably naturally, on his or her own. Now, sometimes when you don't pay attention to the sequence, you can develop a splinter skill, and Carol's going to tell you about that.
Yeah, I remember as a preschool teacher, I taught for 25 years. Sometimes a child was immature, and the school would suggest to the parent, let's give this child a chance to pause for 1 more year in preschool. And often the parent would say, oh, but he's so precocious. He can read, and he can write his name. And our answer would be, well, he's got yes, he's got some skills that we hope a kindergartner is beginning to learn. but we think that maybe he's not quite ready to play like a kindergartner. And so there was this perhaps a disconnect between what we, the school, saw and what the parents hoped. A little kid who can write or read, that's fantastic, and the parents can be very proud of that. But that is often what we call a splinter skill. And this is a very narrow skill that a child has worked very hard to develop in most cases. So do you ever wonder about a kid who could do this in pre-K, could write letters and a name, but then gets to third grade and can't put a sentence down on the paper? And do you ever think, and of course, this is how I would be talking to parents. Do you ever think that's unusual, that something's going on here? The child who has a splinter skill may lack the foundational skills that Joy was just showing us in that pyramid. But by working very hard, a 4-year-old might have learned to write her name. She's figured out how to hold a crayon just so, but cannot generalize that grip for a pencil or for a pair of scissors or for a paintbrush. And the child may be unable to write words other than the ones that she has practiced over and over again. So we want to be able to take skills and generalize them. That's sequential development. So
that's part of the automatic part of it too, that these skills are going to be automatic. That a splinter skill needs to be paid attention to. Yeah. It's not something evolved easily over time.
Right. So how do we avoid splinter skills? How does development happen? Let's go on to the next slide. So when development is purring along in the central nervous system, here's how it happens. The neurons connect to other neurons. So information comes in through the central nervous system, goes to the brain, and these neurons are saying, "Oh, wake up! Oh, here's something that smells nice. Oh, that reminds me of something else. Oh, that's got an element of tasty good." And so all of the information is coming in, and all the senses are talking to each other. So these neurons are connecting and creating neural pathways that are there often for good. And as children have new experiences or move in new ways, their neural pathways are strengthened and even more pathways are made. And finally, the goal is to have these pathways so strong that movements become automatic and the child doesn't have to think, how do I get this cup to my mouth? The child has done it a number of times and the brain says, we remember, and here's how you pick it up with just the right amount of force, and here's how you bring it to your mouth, and etc. So that's how it happens.
Harry, before we go on to sensory processing, tell me if you agree with me that now children don't have the opportunity, and I'm talking about babies, infants, don't have the opportunity to move because they have these car seats that, so you take your child and you put her in the car, in this thing, and then you carry that out to the car, and then you take the whole thing out with the child in it and put it in the stroller, and the child hasn't perceived any kind of moving at all because the child's been in that thing that's convenient for the parent. So the neural pathways aren't being strengthened at all. Sometimes they're not even being created. And we're making life easier for the child, making it harder. Would you agree with that?
It's very true. I'm glad you brought back to that thought before, that we make it easier for the child now and harder for him later. Yeah. And I'll just throw in a little aside that I'm sure everybody knows that little kids have to be on their tummies. They have to be able to push up against the ground and get all that very important information through their skin and their muscles, and it helps with their visual system. In fact, being on their tummies is how children develop the foundational skills to learn how to write and to read. And when they're on their backs in a supine position, facing up, they're not getting any of that input into their upper bodies. But you're right, these containers, or what do we call them? I think the expression is bucket babies. You know, plunk here, plunk here, plunk here, plunk here. All right.
And when our kids were little, we had those walker things that you put the baby in and the baby can move his feet, but he's not balancing and he's not holding himself up and he's not learning how to balance and walk at the same time. So yes, it makes it easier for him to move, but none of the things on the screen are happening for him.
Yeah,
Or
we need
not
to
at
target
the,
for him in a way. We want to make it challenging. We want obstacles in our children's
exactly.
path. We don't want to take obstacles away, because if there are no obstacles, how are they going to handle real obstacles when they're 33 years old? Life is an obstacle course, right? So we got to get them, start training them when they're young. All right, let's look at the next slide about sensory processing. Here's a definition. This is the way that the nervous system takes in and organizes messages about sensations. Is it hot? Is it heavy? Am I close to it? Is it fuzzy? These sensations come from the environment and from your own body. And the nervous system interprets all the sensory information to bring out appropriate responses for us to function in daily life. So even from the in utero, little children are processing sensations. Now, we have 8 senses, and
Hold on. Here we go.
There we go. Okay, thank you. I Googled this today. Joy, you'll get a kick out of this, and I hope other people will too. In the 4th century BC, Aristotle said that there are 5 and only 5 senses: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. Visual, auditory, olfactory, gustatory, tactile. And that was it. So everyone believed it because it was Aristotle who said it. In the 21st century, we have learned that there are more than 5. And it was so funny when I was Googling it today, I saw that some people say, oh no, we have 9. No, we have 18. No, we have 22. And even there are some who say we have 53 sensory systems. So I just threw that out to you because this is a dynamic, sensory processing is a dynamic field, and people are learning about it all the time. And I don't know. Anyway, I can count up to 8. So we have the 5 that Aristotle told us we have, and then there are 3 more that a lot of people do not know about. Parents don't know about this until they read about it or hear about it. One of them is the vestibular system, and this is all about our movement and our balance. And this is again developing in utero. Every time mom bends over to pick up the laundry basket, so does the fetus. Every time mom goes up and down stairs, so does the fetus. So the baby is already learning about gravity. The proprioceptive sense is a sense of body position. This is where our body parts are in relation to each other, in relation to the earth. We use the proprioception for picking things up and pushing, etc. And the interoceptive sense is that's about our internal organs. There's conscious and unconscious awareness of our organs, so that we're conscious of things like when our heart is beating fast, or when we're hungry, or when we need to urinate. We're unconscious about what our gallbladder is doing at any given time. but all of that's interoceptive, and it has to, all those organs have to be humming along for us. And of course, it's obvious if our internal temperature is out of whack, we're going to be sweating all the time, and it's hard to concentrate on what the teacher is saying when we're so hot, or when we're so thirsty, or when we have to pee all the time. When things aren't going smoothly, we're thinking too much about our body and not about our place in the world.
For purposes of this, we are not going to talk anymore about the interoceptive or taste or smell or auditory. We're going to concentrate on tactile, vestibular, proprioceptive in terms of sensory, and then we're going to talk about the perceptual motor, and then we're going to talk just a little about the very important visual system. Carol, you finished with this?
Yep.
Okay. So the tactile processing is the touch sense, and it's receiving sensations through the skin and hair and then responding to those sensations. So if you're sitting right now, you don't feel your butt on the chair, except that now that I said that, you probably do. A child, or you don't feel your back against the back, except that now that I said it, you probably do. So you didn't before I said it because your tactile processing is working and your system knows how to filter out those sensations that are not important to what you're doing right now. A child that has poor tactile processing is feeling that all the time. These are the kids that, well, you know, the kids that don't like tags in their clothes or only like a certain kind of clothing. But I think many of us, especially during the pandemic when we were all inside, decided that we just liked baggy clothes. We just liked wearing comfortable clothes. And that's part of that. The other thing is, when you think about it, the skin is our biggest organ. It's the biggest organ of the body. And there's all kinds of interesting things about the skin. But so that's tactile processing. So some people love to be touched very gently on the skin. Some people love to be touched harder. Tactile processing is also very important for safety, because tactile processing is going to tell you that the fire is hot, and so you don't put your finger in it. And tactile processing is going to tell you when it's too cold. But tactile processing also goes into a lot of fine motor stuff. Sometimes it's tactile processing and it's misinterpreted as fine motor. Carol, would you say that's right?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
I love that picture of that little tiny hand on the Play-Doh worms, touching it and learning so much about it that you can't do if you're just looking at a picture.
That's a great thing to say. You can't, you have no idea. Those of us looking at the picture right now have no idea if that's cold. It doesn't look terribly wet to me, but we don't know if it's cold or warm. We are not, those neural pathways that Carol was talking about a few slides ago are not being formed with us just looking at it. You really have to use the tactile system.
You really have to touch. So another very, very important system is the vestibular sense. And this is in our inner ear. Receptors are in the inner ear. It's like a carpenter's level. So when we tip our head in our inner ear, we're getting messages from gravity about that, oh, our head is tipped. We're not square with the earth. And our desire is to be centered. So, you know, think about it when you've got your 2 feet on the ground, your eyes are out looking out, making one image out of 2 with binocular vision. Your hands are ready to grab something or push it away, and you're in your optimal position when you're grounded and centered, not leaning over to one side, not slumped over. Nature wants us upright and ready. So our vestibular sense says, hey, you're upside down. Like these children are getting some intense vestibular input right now. And little kids love being upside down. Many children love being dizzy. Some hate this kind of thing, and we should all be aware. Oh, they hate it. Well, should they hate it so much? Some children crave being upside down, and we should also question, should they be seeking
Looked at.
that? Okay, so let's remember the vestibular sense is the master sense, and if we don't feel connected to the earth, if we don't feel like we know where we are on the earth, then we won't be secure in our place on the earth, and everything else feels shaky. So
I'd like to say 3 things about the vestibular system. May I?
yes.
Thank you. Okay, so one of them is if you're listening and you're sitting in a chair that you could lean back if you're sitting on a 4-legged chair and you can lean back on the last 2 legs, on the back 2 legs, right before you fall, you're going to feel like a pinch in the middle of your chest. That's your vestibular system telling you you're in danger. Some kids need to activate that in order to be upright. We have a son who's now an adult, but when he was a little boy, he used to have to rock back and forth whenever he talked on the phone because he needed to waken up his vestibular system. Another thing I want to say about the vestibular system is that it is the basis for good visual tracking and good visual skills. So if your vision and your vestibular system are very tied together. And the third thing I want to say is that the vestibular system is the baby working himself or herself through the birth canal has a lot to do with the visual system. And so children who are born by C-section sometimes have issues with the vestibular system.
Interesting. And I'd like to say a fourth thing about the vestibular system, which is the auditory system is very much connected to the vestibular system too. And you can understand that one because the inner ear is where the vestibular system is happening, and the outer ear is where the auditory system is happening. And it's all the auditory system developed out of the vestibular system. It sequentially evolved that way. Well, it's like saying everything's connected. The neck bone's connected to the ankle bone.
It is awkward. And here's perception.
Okay, this is the body position sense, the unconscious awareness of sensations coming from our muscles and joints and ligaments. Proprioception, we need proprioception to judge how far to reach our hand out to pick up the glass of milk. Oh, Joy just did it with her iced tea. Yeah, so she knew how far to reach out her hand, how much effort to put into picking it up, and then how to bring it back and tip it just right to get into her mouth. All that's proprioception. If you can touch type, that's all proprioception. If you can play the piano and read the notes, and you don't have to, you're reading the notes on the page, you don't have to look at the keys all the time. That's because your hands have learned how to go for that G sharp there. Proprioception is very important. Proprioception, the tactile system, and the vestibular system are considered the 3 essential sensory systems for good sensory processing. I'll say something, there's a lot to say, but what I want to say right now is that when kids can't sit still, when they're real fidgety, or when the opposite is happening, when they can't seem to get going, they can't budge off the couch, see if you can provide some proprioceptive input with heavy work activities and have them push, pull, lift, and carry. So push the desk across the classroom floor, or push open a heavy door, or lift the 2-liter bottles of seltzer water, or the sack of potatoes. Give them heavy groceries to carry, that if they fall, it won't matter. You were going to make mashed potatoes anyway, so, it doesn't matter if the potatoes fall. But here, again, let's not make life easier for our children. Let's make it a little more challenging for them and give them hard work to do, because that's what builds their proprioceptive sense. And that's, it also is calming, not only physically, but also emotionally. Proprioception makes everything better.
Carol,
Take it away.
would you say that proprioception is, of those three senses, that is the one that suffers the most from working only with screens? I'm thinking this right now while we're talking.
No, I would say tactile and vestibular suffer too.
Well, yes, they all suffer, but proprioception, I'm thinking of your story about the app that I was a child picking up apples using a cursor and putting it in one basket from the other, and the child's learning nothing about how heavy that apple is, or he's getting no proprioceptive input other than moving the cursor, I guess. So yeah, proprioception is my favorite.
Yeah, everyone has a favorite. Tactile is one.
Which is yours? Tactile? Yeah, mine's proprioception. Okay, so now we're going to talk about perceptual motor development. And you cannot have good perceptual motor development unless you have good sensory development. You can have good sensory development without perceptual motor development. Perceptual motor development is, well, it refers to a motor response that follows a perception, but it's sent to the brain, and then through those pathways we were talking about, it goes to the muscle groups that should respond. And an easier way of saying this is it's a little higher up on that developmental pyramid. It's the kinds of certainly you need your sensory systems in place in order to do well in school, but perceptual motor skills are the things that are really important for academics. So we'll talk about a few of them. The first one, is balance. And there are two kinds of balance. Static balance is in place, and dynamic balance is moving. And balance develops as the baby begins to push up on both hands. Carol was talking about having the baby prone on the stomach. That's so important, starting as soon as the baby can pick up her head. And the more more you advise parents to have their kids on the floor, the better. Just do it. Just ask them to do it. It's good for the kids. So as the balance develops, as baby learns to sit on her own, and also by creeping, which is on the hands and knees. Crawling is when the stomach is flat on the floor. Creeping is hands and knees. And that is really a very important skill for these little ones to have. And some parents are very excited that their kids walked early. I don't find that very exciting at all. I think the longer they creep on their hands and knees, the more they're developing. They're developing the vestibular systems, so they're developing the tactile systems by touching the ground. They're developing their visual systems by moving through space. Their proprioception, because they have the joints in the wrists and the shoulders and the hips and the knees, and creeping is wonderful. Bilateral coordination is moving both sides of the body at the same time. If you think of a little baby lying on her back, you never see her moving just one side of her body. Everything's going at the same time. But that's not really coordination. She's bilateral, but she's not really coordinated because she hasn't done that purposefully. So bilateral coordination is using both sides of the body at the same time. And that is important to have because it keeps you balanced. So if you have trouble with bilateral coordination, there's a good chance that you're going to have trouble with using both eyes, with binocular vision, which is using both eyes at the same time. So it's an important it's an important skill. And the best thing you can do for little ones is have them do activities that have them using both feet, both arms at the same time. Jumping on 2 feet is great. Clapping is a bilateral coordination activity. Carol, can you think of another easy bilateral coordination activity? Carol, are you there?
Jumping jack.
Yeah, that's for an older kid, certainly. Yeah, jumping, hitting the floor with 2 hands. That's good. Carol, you want to talk about body awareness?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, good.
Okay, body awareness. This is pretty important for a lot of self-help skills, like getting dressed, like going up and down stairs, alternating steps as the child sequentially learns to climb stairs, tossing and catching a ball, writing. It's the picture in your head of your own body parts and where they are and how they're interrelating. And as again, I'm referring back to my years as a preschool teacher, when it was time we would give children paper plates and we would give them little cutouts of circles and triangles and popsicles and suggestions of facial features. And we would say, if you want to, you can make a face. It was never a demand, it was just a suggestion. And the kids who would have all the facial features in one little collection on one side of the paper plate, or things all mixed up at the age of 4, if they were doing that, that was an indication that body awareness was not a perceptual skill that these children had incorporated yet. They didn't know where their body parts are. So it was something that we could look at and we could work with. Very important to have body awareness. Another important perceptual motor skill is directionality.
Before we just, Carol, can I just say one thing about body awareness? I advise parents of infants even to talk about body parts. I'm washing your hand now. Let's wash your other hand. The baby can't talk yet and won't be able to repeat it, but just getting familiar with all the parts of your body is really important for little ones. And now Carol's going to talk about directionality.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, ankles. Ankles. I was just thinking again about drawing, thinking back on my kids, when children were able to make representational drawings, which they, around 4, they're doing that. You'll notice that the details are not there. Like the neck apparently is the last section of the body that children will draw because they can't see it. And they can look down and they can see their wrists, which are and their 5 fingers, but the neck comes last because they're not aware of it until they become aware of it. All right, directionality. This is the awareness of up, down, forward, backward, and the ability to move in that direction on command. So kids need directionality to get from point A to point B. And this can mean whether they're painting a horizon at the easel or writing words across a page of paper or moving across the playground. All of these experiences lead to skills such as riding a bike through the neighborhood, reading a map, and driving a car. And it starts in early childhood as the child moves through space. So again, we are saying this to you over and over again in many different ways. The child needs to be out there in the environment, experiencing the world in many, many different ways with his or her body.
Carol, do you want to tell them about that study you told me about in London about the cab drivers?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, yeah, this is a classic study. The black, they call them the black cabs. It's the biggest fleet of taxis in London, and there's a test that the potential drivers have to take. It's called, they have to study what's called the knowledge with a capital K, the knowledge. And the knowledge is where every little tiny street in London is and how to get there. And since GPSs have been introduced into the taxi cab drivers' lives, studies are showing that they don't have to work so hard with their own brains. They can use rely on the GPS, and their hippocampi, those two little things at the back of their head that have to do with direction and where they are in space, their hippocampuses or hippocampi are shrinking because they're not using it. So we want big hippocampuses.
Although, if you have GPS, why do you need? Remember MapQuest? Okay, let's move on to another perception motor skill, laterality. And you know how you have your favorite sensory things? My favorite, it might be laterality. Laterality is the ability to move one side of the body independently of the other. Of course, everybody can do that, even a 1-year-old, because they don't move like robots like this. They can move it, but they're not doing it easily and effectively. The most important and the earliest lateral movements are creeping, again, on hands and knees, which is why creeping is so important. And I use laterality. Laterality is going up and down stairs one step at a time. Is alternating feet. I guess, yeah, alternating feet is laterality. And well, one step at a time would also be. But I tell parents and teachers that you shouldn't expect a child to be able to write until he can go up and down steps, alternating steps without holding on. And that means that his balance is okay. But in terms of laterality, handwriting is a very lateral task. One hand is holding the paper while the other hand is moving. And sometimes you see early writers, and sometimes not so early, writing and their tongues are moving along with their hands. And that means that that message that was sent to the hand to write is overflowing and going into the tongue as well. You also sometimes see the child holding the paper very hard, very strongly, or with a lot of pressure with one hand while the other's writing. That's an indication that laterality is not yet well established. And it's a really important skill. And the best thing you can do to help develop laterality, which develops out of good bilateral coordination, is encourage the child to do activities that alternate sides. Marching is a good lateral activity, taking rhythm sticks and hitting the floor one at a time. Anything skipping, of course, if they can skip, they probably have good laterality. Okay, the next one is midline crossing, and this is my second favorite. Midline crossing is the ability to use the hand, foot, or eye across the invisible vertical line that runs down the center of our bodies. A 2-year-old is not going to cross the midline. Of course, she can move her arm across the midline, but if she's standing in front of an easel with 2 buckets of paint, she's going to have one hand pick up one brush and one hand pick up the other brush and go up and down like this. A 3-year-old's going to start crossing the midline. A 4-year-old should be crossing the midline. I would say this little girl in this picture is probably 6, and she is beautifully crossing the midline. And the reason, one of the most important reasons that's important is that the eyes tend to follow the hand, and by crossing the midline, you're integrating the 2 sides of the world. So children who have midline crossing issues, a 3-year-old will naturally have a midline crossing issue, and it's not an issue, it's development. But a 7-year-old should not have midline crossing issues, and you'll see a lot of letter reversals, because a lowercase b and a lowercase d are the same thing. They're a vertical line with a circle. And if you're not aware of the 2 sides of the world or the 2 sides of your body, then there won't be a difference between the two.
So,
So
to be
go ahead.
alert to issues with midline crossing, look at well, preschoolers again. Sorry, I'm stuck in preschool. The wheels on the bus go round and round, and the wipers on the bus go swish, swish, swish. So
And
if you
to one end, right?
see a little child who's going swish, 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 instead of swish, 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 that's an indication. Or you'll see a child neglecting one side and only one hand will go swish, swish, swish. But it stops dead center. The hand
Yeah,
does
but
not.
let's say that, young kids, that's okay, because midline crossing is a slightly more advanced skill. You expect to see midline crossing at 5 or 6 in terms of drawing, in terms of perception. A child, there's something called a divided rectangle, which has a line down the middle and down a vertical line down the center and a horizontal line down the center, and then 2 diagonals crossing in the middle. And if you present that to a young child, a developing child, they're going to reproduce it by drawing a dot in the middle and all of the lines coming out, because their brain still is seeing the 2 sides. And what you want to see is the crossing of
Yeah,
those.
from northeast to southwest through the
Right,
dot.
right.
Yeah.
And sometimes, because as adults, we tend to have a preferred hand, we don't think about how we present things to children. So if you have the opportunity to, when you're presenting something to a child, present it, move it a little bit so that they have to cross the midline in order to do it. Or if you ever do a high five or something like that, put your hand somewhere where they have to cross the midline. They're not going to say, oh, look, I'm crossing the midline, but they're going to be building that neural pathway that Carol talked about at the beginning. And every time they do it, they're going to be strengthening it so that it will, when they need midline crossing for writing across the page, for understanding the 2 sides of the world and integrating them, it will be automatic. And that's what we're looking for in everything.
Yeah.
Carol, this is you, right? Motor planning?
Motor planning. Yeah. And here, Joy, this is a picture of Joy and me. Oh, just kidding.
Yeah, I'm the one over on the left in the back. That's me. Okay.
All right. Motor planning or praxis. Praxis is a Greek word. It means action or doing. And motor planning is the ability to think up and organize and sequence the steps of an unfamiliar and complex movement in a coordinated way. And my favorite example is your friend says, okay, I'm going to come pick you up and we're going to go to take a walk. And you get into the car, you haven't been in her car yet, you're a passenger, and you have to put on the seatbelt. So it's new. So you have to think about this hard. And there are 6 different sensory systems that are engaged in putting on a seatbelt. There's vision, proprioception, tactile, visual, even auditory, all involved in that. Say that your friend comes for you on Thursday to take you for another walk. Now you've done it before, so it's a little bit easier. And the 3rd time she comes for you, you can reach over, you know how much oomph to put into pulling it from the wall. You kind of got it. For people who don't have good motor planning, putting that seatbelt on might be take a dozen times or 17 times out of 20. You might get it on the 3rd time easily, and someone with motor planning issues will have to work really hard. And think about that jalopy that Joy put us on earlier, where the pedals are reversed and the turn signal doesn't work and the mirrors are crazy. We have to work at it so hard to get that car going. So motor planning is really important. To try something new that's complex, think about it, master the steps, and then be able to use it and build on it as we go.
And the most important way to develop motor planning is let these kids move themselves. If he's having a hard time climbing out of the sandbox, instead of picking him up so he doesn't have to do it, say, I bet you can do this. I know you can do it. And let him work it out. And you will see, I promise you, the first time it will be hard, and the second time you'll see it's easier. You can watch children at the playground learn new things. They're not saying, I'm going to do it this way, but they're building those neural pathways.
And that's fun. That's the fun of the sandbox, getting in and out of the sandbox. Not having mommy pluck you up and take you out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you know, if there are any parents of young children listening to this, or any people working with parents of young children, if you can add maybe 2 extra minutes to your day, let your children, starting at 1, starting as young as possible, let them get into their car seats themselves. You're putting them in and you're robbing them of so many different perceptual, motor, and sensory skills that they could gain simply by climbing up into their car seats. And one of them is motor planning, praxis.
Right, right. So I tell us.
And another one is that what you were going to ask me to do, Carol? Tell you about spatial awareness?
Yes, spatial.
Oh, okay. It's the understanding of space and where one is in relation to the world. And it's I had a very hard time at the beginning differentiating spatial awareness from directionality, but spatial awareness is more, I want to say more 3-dimensional than directionality, but that's not quite it. Directionality is where things are in relation to one another, and spatial awareness is understanding how big you are, how small you are, whether you're going to fit under the obstacle, whether you're going to walk around the puddle, whether you're going to hit the tree as you're walking in the path. Is it going to hit you in the face, or are you low enough to know that? The best way to develop spatial awareness is by moving through space. So that little baby who's in the container that we talked about is learning absolutely nothing about spatial awareness when she's carried from place to place. She's learning nothing. You have to move through space in order to understand spatial awareness. There's just no other way to do it.
Right. Just a thought about directionality. Directionality can be learned in 2 dimensions. So you can.
Mostly, not like in front of and back of.
Right. You can,
Mostly
you can go from southwest to northeast on a piece of paper, and that is a part of directionality. But spatial awareness has to be 3-dimensional.
And
that's all I have to say.
This is our favorite saying about this. Go, Carol.
A child cannot learn about a 3-dimensional world when all the kid has is 2-dimensional monitors. So an in-sync child uses all of the sensory and perceptual motor skills that we've just been talking about to physically interact with people and objects in the environment in order to gain knowledge about the world. And looking at a 2-dimensional screen is not enough. Yet our 21st century children are, especially in the past 3 years, have been mostly learning about their world 2-dimensionally, visually. Vision is an extremely important sense. It's not our only sense, but it has become our most important sense. The development of the occipital lobe, the lobe that concentrates on vision, is larger in modern day children than it was in kids earlier who had good temporal lobes and prefrontal lobes, and everything else had a chance to be big, but the occipital lobe is really big in a lot of our kids. So vision is very important.
I'm sorry, Carol. I keep interrupting.
Okay. I'm going to turn it over to you, Joy. I'm just going to say vision is very, very important.
before we,
along with the other senses. But go ahead, Joy, take it away.
I'm looking at these two pictures, and for me, the one on the upper left is so much more appealing than the one on the bottom right, but there could be people that prefer the bottom right. My sense is those people are tending towards out of sync children rather than in sync children. But this is a great segue. I ask you, as we segue to this next slide and this next portion of our presentation, keep in mind this picture in the upper left of the child in the woods. And even as we look at this child in the woods, most of us, I think, can see the depth of that picture as opposed to the depth of the picture of the, I don't know if it's a boy or a girl, but of the child in the lower right, who's really moving nothing other than his fingers and maybe his arms.
Yeah.
Okay, the visual system. The visual system to me is crucially important, and the visual system, I believe, is the most is having the most damage done to it by the advent of screens, and certainly by the pandemic when most of us were inside and afraid to go outside. The visual system is a huge system, and for purposes of this presentation, we're just going to talk about three aspects of it: acuity, binocular vision, and tracking. But there is a worldwide boom of people younger and younger and younger coming in with myopia, which is nearsightedness. And children are born very, very farsighted. That means that they can only really focus far, far, far away. And as they get older, your system becomes what 20/20, which is a measure of acuity, which probably most of us have heard of. But because these little kids, 2-year-olds, who anatomically, in terms of the visual system, are supposed to be rolling down hills and running outside and looking far away, because these little kids are even sitting on these potty training things with their iPads in front of them, they're forcing their visual systems into myopia. So the visual system is much overlooked, I think, in the school system, I think in clinics, in homes, and I hope you leave this presentation understanding how all of these systems that we've talked about go together. So acuity is the measurement of sight, 20/20, like I said. Normal acuity is represented as 20/20. That means that 20 feet, I can see at 20 feet what everyone can see at 20 feet. You've seen this chart on the right. Acuity can be corrected with lenses. If you're farsighted, the lenses can bring your acuity in so that you're 20/20. If you're nearsighted, it can bring it out. Acuity, of course, is important for reading and for seeing and for life in general. And if you have the opportunity to look at our book, Growing an Instinct Child, we have a great on page 19, there is a great picture that you can look at, and your acuity will be able to see everything, but you won't know what it is until somebody tells you. Okay, the next one is binocularity, and binocularity is using both eyes at the same time. Binocularity is really important for depth perception. If you cover your eye right now, I assume most of you are watching this on a screen. So if you cover one eye and take your other hand and reach for the screen, you will either touch it, my guess is sooner than you thought you were going to, or further than you thought you had to reach to get it, assuming that you are using both of your eyes at the same time. Binocularity goes with bilateral integration, using the two sides. With the vestibular system, Carol was talking about being very grounded, being very even, and it's a really important thing for staying bilateral. So if you have children with a head tilt, or or if you are an adult or know an adult with a head tilt, it's likely that person is only using one eye at a time and is not binocular. We want to discourage children from lying with their heads on the desk while they're reading or writing, or lying on the floor. When their heads are down, they're only using one eye, and that is not a good thing. Okay, visual tracking.
Tracking. So tracking is a very important survival skill. Nature has designed us to be able to wobble our eyes and our head without moving any other body part. And that's really important when that saber-toothed tiger is coming towards you and you want to see where the tree is to climb, but you don't want to get him excited with your motion. So we today expect that the maturing child can sit quietly with his head in one place and his eyes can go back and forth to read across the page. Or he could look up at the sky and he could watch an airplane. Or he could hold his head still and he could look from one side of the room to the other. Why don't you try that right now? Keep your chin straight and look way, way over to the right and then way, way over to the left. And I have heard that if you have forgotten where your car keys are and you do that, you make your eyes go back and forth, it will stimulate your memory. Just try it sometime. So this is the ability to watch a moving target with eyes only. Very important, because nature prefers economy of motion. Let's not waste energy on recruiting muscle groups that are not necessary for a task. So that sums up these three important foundational building blocks: the sensory processing, the established perceptual motor skills, and visual skills. And that's it in a nutshell. We have had a lot of fun putting together 10 webinars that are available on our website at insyncchild.com. There are 10. The first 4 give the groundwork of what we consider our in-sync child philosophy and method. And then the remaining 6 are take one simple prop like a paper plate or a piece of rope, and we show you many, many different ways to use a very simple thing to get children moving, thinking, using their perceptual motor skills, their sensory skills, their visual skills, weaving it all together, giggling the whole way through and asking for more.
So seminars 2, 3, and 4 go into much greater depth about the stuff we talked about today. The stuff we talked about today is pretty much the introduction to the in-sync child. Our publications include Growing an In-Sync Child, which is our book. The first part of it is a lot of theory, and then it has about 50 activities to do, very simple activities to do with your kids that will develop and enhance the skills we've talked about. The cards and the card book Carol told you about, and the year of mini moves for the in-sync child. We think everybody should have this in their house. It has 52 weeks of very simple little things that your child can do. Lie on the floor and put your feet in the air and clap 10 times, or make your body look like the letter P. Very simple things, but for these children who are not in their bodies, we want them to meet their bodies. We want them to feel comfortable in their bodies and to want to use their bodies. So we're very proud of this, our new baby, and we love it.
This is one for a Saturday in week 7. Lie on your tummy and push up on your hands like a cobra. Look at the sky. Very simple, but engaging, tactile, proprioceptive, vestibular,
bilateral, right? Bilateral, pushing up on both sides, body awareness, spatial
Right.
awareness, look up, directionality. Yep.
Yeah, simple, but it gets a lot in there. And look at your kids when they're doing something like when they're stretching, and just try to see if you can apply some of these different skills and celebrate how the children are naturally exercising these skills and developing them and loving the challenge of stretching further. And
That's the part of it, loving the challenge. Yes.
yeah,
We want happy kids. That's the most important thing of all. And we believe an instinct child is a happy child.
yeah, right.
Please keep in touch with us. You can certainly ask us questions through this GoToWebinar thing, but you can also reach us through our website, www.instinctchild.com, and you can follow us on Facebook. We try to post articles and little things, little tips daily on our Facebook page. We'd love to have you join us there. Carol?
Yeah, stay in sync. Take a few minutes every day to give your children moving experiences that we promise will last a lifetime.
Thank you for being here, and we are happy to answer any questions you might have.
Yep, we're here for you.
All right, the first question coming in is, what is the difference between sensory motor development and perceptual motor?
Carol, you want me to do it? You want to do it?
Well, I'll start and you jump in, Joy. Sensory processing skills have to start from the very beginning when the child's in utero, and these 8 sensory systems begin to develop and flourish the moment the child is born. And once they have a strong, secure place in the child's body, then the child can use those sensory systems to develop the more cognitive perceptual motor skills. And Joy, you can correct me or amend it.
No. Perceptual motor skills depend on sensory skills. I think sensory skills are, in the very beginning of time, were probably developed for the safety of the fetus and the neonate and the young child. Perceptual motor skills are, for lack of a better word, they're this academics. They're what you need to succeed in a world that has reading and writing. Although I have to say that this world that we're in now is not as familiar to me as the non-technological world, as you might have noticed by my lack of smoothness in changing these screens. But we still believe that even though the world's changed, the way children develop hasn't and shouldn't. And perceptual motor skills are higher up on that developmental pyramid, if you remember that from earlier on in our presentation. So you can't have good perceptual motor skills unless you have good sensory skills, which are the foundation upon which the perceptual motor skills are built.
And I'm going to say something else. I hope OTs will agree with this. You're born with your sensory skills. It's not something that can be taught. You see, you hear, you feel, and
well, I don't think any of these things can be taught. They can be developed and enhanced by the environments in which we put these children. And even as adults, I think if you recognize in yourself or someone you know as an adult that has poor sensory or perceptual motor skills, we can help. They can be developed. I don't think perceptual motor skills can be taught either. I think they have to be developed.
Okay, but I just wanted to make a little differentiation. That's the sensory stuff. You've got it or you don't. You see or you don't see. But perceptual motor skills develop over time with experience.
Okay.
I will have to talk about
Well,
that.
perceptual motor, I think perceptual motor are skills, perceptual motor skills. And I think sensory is not a skill as much as a, what's another word for it, Carol? It's not a skill, it's a system.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah.
system, right? So the sensory are systems upon which these skills are developed, are built and developed.
Great. That's good.
Okay.
That was a good question.
All right, the next question coming in, does a constant need to jump as a 6-year-old ever stop or integrate?
I'm
Will
sorry.
you repeat that?
Again?
Sure, does a constant need to jump as a 6-year-old ever stop or integrate?
Well, we would
Yes.
hope it would integrate, but I think that behavior is telling us something, not knowing anything else about the 6-year-old. Carol, would you agree?
Yeah, I think if the child is incessantly needing to jump, that to me looks like a sensory craver. A child who is not satisfied with the amount of jumping that a typical child is comfortable with. Jumping brings a lot of proprioception into the body. That jolt is what a lot of children need. It brings in tactile and vestibular and visual and even auditory information too. So this child is saying, the jumping that satisfies Sammy over there is not satisfying me. I need more, more, more. And maybe
I'm thinking vestibular too.
vestibular, right.
Yeah.
That's, observing that, that's great that the person who asked the question observed that, because you might want to explore that and talk to somebody, an expert like an occupational therapist who practices sensory integration techniques.
Or we'd be happy to help you if you reach out to us through our website. I can think of a few things to do. Use that. I mean, if I'm assuming you're speaking either about a child that you live with or that you work with, the child loves jumping, so we don't want to say stop jumping. The child loves it, so we want to use it, but let's use it to do something else so that the jumping becomes automatic. Jump every time, jump each as you spell your name, jump as you spell each letter of the word in your spelling list. I guess I hope 6-year-olds don't have spelling lists, but who knows?
Yeah, you can use it. You can use it playfully, and get a trampoline. If the child wants to jump, you might have fun on a trampoline.
All right, the next question coming in is, what is the best way to get teachers to stop pushing through the curriculum and look at some of those underlying skills and see the need to address these first?
Oh God, start a new country. I don't, Carol,
Okay, be a squeaky wheel. If you're a parent asking that question, if you find the teacher is stuck on pushing the academics and not letting the children have enough recess or enough movement, talk as much as you can about how kids need to move. And every 10 minutes, it's really great if a child can do some simple calisthenics or stand up and walk around the desk or get a piece of stretchy band and tug on it. I mean, sometimes you can persuade a teacher to let children use equipment that doesn't make any noise and that the child won't abuse. I am sad to say there are many old-fashioned teachers who don't want any of these suggestions or any extra equipment. But an approach to a teacher who's kind of stuck on doing it a certain way is to say, gosh, I know when my son Jimmy is distracting the class because he's moving all the time, I know that must be hard for you. Here's what we do at home. We make sure he has recess every day and that he's never, I mean, we have him outside every day, and I'm sure you do too. And even when it's raining, kids can go outside, or you can do something in the classroom if you can't go outside. And we know that movement really helps Jimmy. We know that sitting on a therapy ball or a tea stool, a stool that looks like a tea, really helps him. Joy, you're shaking your head.
Teacher's not going to be open. My sense is this teacher's not going to be open. Could you read that question again, Allison, slowly?
Sure, let me come back in here. All
What is
right. Yeah, to talk to a teacher about, if they're stuck on the kind of the academics and not really wanting to hear these foundational things.
Okay, so probably, depending on what grade we're talking about, you need to start with the principal and with the school, with educating people in the school, because there's a lot of things that go into that question, depending on, if they're still stuck on No Child Left Behind, or they have to, there's a lot of stuff going on there. There are some good books. If you, a lot of the in-sync child activities are pre-academic. Like when Carol and I were writing Growing an In-Sync Child, we were going to call it How Rolling Down a Hill Gets You into Harvard. And then we thought we couldn't guarantee everyone could get into Harvard who rolled down a hill. But some teachers don't realize that doing fun movement things are helping academics. You can get, the question is it the end result the teachers are looking for, or is it the way they get there? And if they're looking at end results, then it's a lost cause. But if they're looking at the way we get there, we are happy. If you reach out to us specifically through our website or our Facebook page, we are happy to work with you on this. And we can give you, Carol, between the two of us, we have a bunch of books we can recommend. It's a question of whether this teacher is even open to listening.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate, going to the teacher and sympathizing with her and trying not to look at her as an adversary, but as a collaborator. It is helpful if you say to her, I know it must be tough having my son in the classroom, and here's what we do, and maybe some of these suggestions will help you too. That might be something to get your toe in the door.
I have a granddaughter who was in kindergarten last year, and she had reading homework, which made me want to throw up. And the teacher was very nice, and our granddaughter was not particularly a problem. But I know that that's not appropriate for a 5 and 6 years old. So I told her about our book, and I offered her the book, and she was not the least bit interested. So it all depends on the personality of the person you're working with. It really does.
Sure.
But we're happy to offer this webinar to your school system. I mean, we're happy to help any way we can. Just tell us. We want